first time I laid eyes on Super Mario 64 was at a Walmart, so as you can imagine it was a pretty depressing experience for me, but the video game looked off the hizzy, as all the kids were saying back then. Mario, the first video game character that I was ever properly introduced to, was no longer just some 2D character. He was a 3D character now. Now he could do new, exciting 3D graphical things, like saving Peach. You know, something out of the box, though mostly something he did because her only security force is a group of talking mushrooms, and she accidentally got kidnapped inside her own castle. So, way to go. But just because I think Peach is a bit inept a lot most of the time, that doesn't mean that I don't love the hell out of this game. At the risk of sounding lame, and I will sound lame, there was this odd sense of magic when I first played Mario 64. Just the idea of taking a video game character that I was already so fond of, that was in 2D, and being able to control him in this new third dimension. That nearly destroyed my fragile young mind. I mean, I could run up and punch Goombas right in their face, for Christ's sakes. Because why wouldn't I? They're just running right at me anyways. But then they also let you run, swim, fly, crawl, in areas that looked amazing and had incredible soundtracks to boot, and while I'm sure the game doesn't look super impressive by today's standards, back then, it was amazing. And also, I'm very nostalgic about the game, and thus I'm biased as hell. So there's that. But really, the game is good, you guys. Except for Wet Dry World. Fuck that place. It's like they didn't finish it. It bothers the hell out of me. But before any of us got the chance to play the game, though, Mario 64 underwent various changes throughout its development. From it potentially starting out on the Super Nintendo or as a cancelled 3D Yoshi game for the N64, to featuring a bunch of beta differences, including a left-out multiplayer component that would have featured the living myth himself, Luigi. So today on Gaming Mysteries, I'll be talking to you about the beta of Super Mario 64. Though before we go any further, for those having deja vu, yes, I did kind of cover this topic back in 2010. However, that video was crap. It was 3 minutes long and I think I made 1 point. So my goal is to make this a less crap video, which means I'm gonna cross my fingers and just hope for the best. So let's get started. Super Mario 64 is rumored to have begun development in a number of different fashions. Over the years, I've managed to find 3 different explanations as to how the game was conceived. One of which is true, though I'll say all 3 just for kicks. The first and most common theory is that development of Super Mario 64 started out on the Super Nintendo. While Star Fox was being developed, Miyamoto got the idea of creating a 3D Mario game for the Super Nintendo. He began working on a prototype making use of the Super FX chip, and named said prototype Super Mario FX. The game was allegedly going to be an isometric Mario platformer. However, it's said that as time went on, the project became too big for them to pull off on the Super Nintendo, and so Super Mario FX was cancelled in favor of developing a Mario game for the N64 instead. The second version of the story is similar, though carries one key difference. Miyamoto was still inspired to make a 3D Mario game using the FX chip, though in addition to that, he was also supposedly making use of an unreleased disk drive system for the Super Nintendo that would have made, and I quote, platforming come to life. Though this was not in fact the case, as years later we would finally learn the truth of Mario 64's origins. I hope. As far as Super Mario FX is concerned, on the other hand, it's not a cancelled Mario game, but instead an idea that came from a misinterpreted piece of info from Miyamoto, where he stated that he had the idea of working on a 3D Mario game for the Super Nintendo, but not that he was actually going to. In fact, someone who helped develop the Super FX chip claimed that Super Mario FX was nothing more than a code name for the chip. We also learned that the reason that the Super Nintendo didn't see a 3D Mario game was not because of any apparent hardware limitations, but because the N64 controller had more buttons. And yes it does. Someone give the counting department at Nintendo a raise of $1 million. While Super Mario FX never came to be though, during this time frame Miyamoto did come up with various concepts and ideas for a 3D Mario game, though it took one particular bit of inspiration to get the ball rolling, and that inspiration was found in a cancelled Yoshi game. Argonaut Software proposed to Nintendo the idea of a 3D Yoshi platformer for the N64, which Nintendo promptly dismissed. The cancelled Yoshi endeavor would go on to become Croc, Legend of the Gobos. But more importantly, the idea of that 3D Yoshi prototype served as Miyamoto's inspiration for Super Mario 64. Allegedly. And with the inspiration in place, it was time to make a game, so of course, up next we look at beta footage, though before that, there are various early ideas for Super Mario 64 that ended up being scrapped for one reason or another, or no reason. That's how Nintendo works, so let's go ahead and talk about some of those first, and then we'll hop into the beta footage. One early idea was that originally they wanted to have 32 courses in the game, though unfortunately only 15 made it into the final product. Very little is known about these cut courses or why they were even cut to begin with, though if I had to speculate, going off of what courses we had in the final game, a good majority of these left out courses probably involved water, fire, snow, or a stupid slide. Perhaps they thought at some point it was overkill. If so, cool, I'll live. I'm starting to develop a fucking vendetta against those penguins, thanks to slides, claiming that I cheated when all I did was use amazing tactics, and I hate you. It seems that the original concept for Super Mario 64 was to have Mario moving on a fixed path, much like he did in the 2D Mario games, but it would be from an isometric perspective, before it was eventually decided to introduce the free-roaming 3D design to the game. And I think it's important that they ended up going with the fully 3D route, as that's what helped make the game so special. It was the first 3D game, or 3D platform, 3D anything that I played that made sense and didn't feel weird or stupid and was fun. Another early and very big gameplay idea they wanted to implement was multiplayer. Initially, the developers tried to make the game split screen, having one player using Mario and the other would use Luigi. The two characters would start at separate points in the castle and work their way through the game together, but this proved to be very difficult to actually pull off, and so the idea was ultimately scrapped. Though the idea of Luigi being in the game would forever be instilled into our memories, because people lie, and occasionally, more often than not, suck. And as a side note, before someone says it, because I know you're going to, yes, I'm very aware that Luigi is in the DS version of the game, but then again, they're not the same game now, are they? Interesting early ideas aside, game footage is where the money is, and in 1995, the world finally got its first look at Super Mario 64, because footage was leaked, though days later a playable version of the game was presented, along with the world premiere of Nintendo's hot new gaming console, the Ultra 64. Not the final name for it if no one guessed. And now that we can actually look at some beta footage, it's clear to see that the game is bleeding with differences. So many in fact that I'm not really sure how the hell I missed all these in my first attempt. Other than the me sucking thing, but other than that I have no idea how I botched it. Now while looking for changes, at a first glance, things may not seem that much different. The various areas seem to be intact, though upon further inspection you'll notice some minor aesthetic differences. And by minor, I mean most of these are very drastic. You'll also see different moves, different voices, and other happy fun time stuff we're gonna get into soon enough. Now of course, with every Nintendo game's beta version, the first thing that sparks my interest is its HUD, and Super Mario 64 unshockingly features a different HUD. The icon that's used to represent your life counter is much more cartoony in its design. Your health counter also looked a bit different, using actual numbers to represent your current health, as well as the handy meter thingy, which is something that I prefer a lot more over the final version. Going beyond the HUD though, this is where you start to see a lot of different stuff going on. To start, let's take a look at Mario. I mean, sure, it seems similar at a first glance, but then he does a triple jump and decides to twirl at the end instead of actually jumping, thus destroying all of your preconceptions. Amazing floating abilities aside, Mario at this point in the game's development featured a much younger, more childlike voice, which I'll play now. There you go, that was indeed a voice of some kind. Why they would want Mario to sound like a child, given the whole he has a mustache thing, is a bit perplexing to me, but I'm not here to do Nintendo's job. But you guys should release some more games to the Wii U, though. And also, if you could send me a t-shirt with Reggie's face on it, that'd be awesome. I'd really appreciate it. Thank you in advance. But speaking of terrible segues, you know Nintendo, if you sold more Wii U's and Wii U games, you'd probably make more money. And I'm going to use money to segue into coins, as coins looked and behaved a bit differently in the beta versions of the game. In the final, whenever you got coins, they just kind of explode into everywhere, though in the beta, they just kind of drop to the ground and start spinning. They also seem to look a little bit more like actual coins, and less like 2D cutouts of coins. Though that could just be the quality of the footage throwing me off, can't really tell. While talking about items that you need to collect looking different though, in this screenshot you can get a nice view of an early design for the stars, and as you can see the stars used to be 2D and featured a similar design to that of the stars found in Super Mario RPG. Admittedly, it doesn't really look good when placed next to all the new fancy N64 graphics, but this was still early in the game's development, so it's not really surprising that they were still using either early versions of things or placeholders for coins and stars and stuff like that. Interestingly enough, in a recent-ish interview about Super Mario 3D Land, it was stated that originally they wanted to include the classic flagpole into Super Mario 64, as kind of your end-of-the-level objective, though after realizing that they were working in this 3D environment now, they didn't want to put the player on a set path and instead wanted them to embrace the idea of exploring and going wherever they wanted, so they decided to have the players get stars instead. Now that pretty much does it for miscellaneous information, although there is a number of unused items and whatnot that were left in the game, but we'll go over that in a bit, as up next I'd like to take a look at some of the early beta courses and look at the differences they hold, whether it be in design or design of the visuals. To start, let's go ahead and talk about the first area you'd see upon starting the game, and that's the main courtyard. Now at a first glance, it looks pretty similar, Mario spinning around like a spaz and sounding like he's 5 aside. Upon further inspection though, you'll notice that all the windows in the castle have a different design to them, though more importantly, in the front of the castle where you usually see the design of Peach, it was instead replaced with a clock in the beta version, and it's also said that the original name of this castle was Koopa's Castle. So perhaps in the early stages of the game, this wasn't Peach's castle, but instead a replica of sorts created by Bowser to trick Mario into having a tea party. It's the only way I can make sense of the situation, especially given some other aesthetic differences that we're going to get into in a second. And somehow I managed to pretty much gloss over this area completely in the first video I did, but it's time to talk about the beta hub room, and as you can see, it looks drastically different. There's the obvious fact of someone went around the room and painted all the walls different colors and put moons and stars on the walls to make it all mystical and stuff. But apparently area locations were also switched around so the doors would take you to different places, and you get the idea. It's not the same as the final version. Oh, and there's no stairs, which is a huge oversight on the designer's part, Jesus Christ. I, for the life of me, can't figure out what the hell is wrong with this room between the color scheme and the no stairs, and mostly no stairs thing, actually. The only explanation I have is that it was created by Bowser because he is evil and bad at decorating and cake parties / tea parties. That's all I got. Now, while the main hub is an example of an area that changed a lot, not all locations saw a ton of changes, as some areas stayed pretty much the same, or similar-ish throughout the whole game's development. One such level is Whomp's Fortress, originally called Rocky Mountain, or Mountain if you're feeling adventurous, and the other is Dire Dire Docks, originally called Waterland, or Waterworld. I'm really digging these self-explanatory names, by the way. I mean, hell, was Bomb Bob Battlefield originally called Grassy Ground Textures Land? Oh, I'm sorry, texture, singular, sorry. But while you won't see a lot of layout differences with at least the 2 stages I mentioned, what is plain to see is that there are plenty of differences in textures, as with those differences alone, the stages look completely different and, dare I say, more detailed? Yes, I do dare. In fact, at this stage in the game's life, it seemed to look a lot more detailed than the final version. I can't say what ended up changing the look of everything, though I have to admit I dig the appearance of most of the beta stuff more, so I'm kind of regretting that they didn't stick with it, but that's just me. We're gonna move on now. The one level that always seemed to fascinate me the most, just because it looked so completely different, was the beta version of Cool Cool Mountain, originally named Snow Level because, of course, it was named Snow Level. Apparently, throughout most of its development, this particular stage remained in alpha, as such it lacked many of the features found in full levels, so Nintendo had it remade into a larger version that you see in the final game, which, good on 'em. What perplexes me, though, is what the hell is with this sacrificial altar behind the penguin supposed to be? Hell, what's the penguin's problem? I mean, look at him, he looks bummed as hell, and, you know, hey, I can sympathize. I mean, I've been working on this video for what seems like a month and a half now, and I feel a little discouraged that I haven't been able to finish it, but, you know, tomorrow's another day, so buck the fuck up. Lethal Lava Land, originally called Fireball Land, which, okay, I do like that name. Kudos to you. In the beta version of it, it seems as though the area was a lot more expansive, which would have made for more platforming, so that's awesome. Though what's more awesome was that, and this is another thing that I seem to completely forget to mention in the first video I did, but originally Super Mario 64 was going to feature Blarg in the game's more lava-intensive stages, and his unfinished character model can still be accessed in the game with use of a game shark. The reason Blarg was ultimately given up on was most likely due to time constraints, though it's hard to say for sure. My condolences to all the Blarg fans in the house. Big Boobs Haunt is another area that saw some key changes because it used to feature keys. Self-explanatory stuff. What isn't explained though is what the keys were for exactly. We do know that you were apparently supposed to get them from booze and that the keys were apparently supposed to be used to open doors, because what the fuck else would they do? But beyond that, your guess is as good as mine. My guess is that they were just a scrapped level idea to get a star, but it was removed because it was probably monotonous as all hell, though that's just speculation. That pretty much covers the more important-ish differences between the beta courses and the final courses. The rest of the differences that we're able to see are mainly aesthetic. Different textures for certain levels, seemingly more detail to everything, deeper colors and the whatnot, but overall same-ish game. And with the beta footage section over with, we move on to the rest of the miscellaneous information. So let's get cracking. Let's go ahead and get this section started with a humdinger though, and to do so we come back to the topic of Yoshi. Within the game's code you can find graphics for a Yoshi Egg. The egg has all of its textures and even the bouncing animation to it, so it's speculated that Yoshi would originally have had a much larger role within the game, which does seem very plausible. I mean, he was in the game. Granted, he was just hanging out on top of the roof, but if you went up to visit him, he gives you mushrooms. So you know he's a valuable, if not completely ineffective team member, but whatever. Plus, if Super Mario 64 really was inspired by a cancelled 3D Yoshi game, perhaps this was their way of referencing that, by giving Yoshi a bigger role in the game. Mind you, it's just speculation on my part. Speaking of things to speculate on, because God knows I haven't said speculate enough times in this video, through hacking you can make both a green and red shell appear in-game, although neither has any functionality, even the green shell despite it actually having functionality in the game. It's said by some that these shells were to behave in a similar fashion to those found in Mario Kart. The green shell would shoot straight ahead and the red shell would home in on fools. The only reason I can think of as to why they ditched this is, would it even be that useful? I mean, they probably wouldn't work on bosses, and it's not like the game is just constantly tossing Goombas at you, so I think we'll all live. Now, Super Mario 64 also features a variety of unused icons and textures, stuff like this key icon for that key thing, this early different colored version of Bowser's eye, all these unused eyes for Mario, this flower that was going to appear in the graphics for Lethal Lava Land for some reason, this trampoline of sorts, which seems to do nothing. Yay, there are even some unused enemies, like this smaller version of a Chili Billy, which was left out for whatever reason. Another potentially very important left out goodie is the yellow switch and the yellow transparent block. Given that it's a switch and a block, some people think that it's likely that Mario may have gotten yet another power-up hat, which I totally have a theory about this, because personally I think that the yellow switch may have unlocked an invincibility star, or like an invincibility star hat, like a hat with a star on it, because it's yellow, right? I mean, it's glowing, but it's, you know, it's yellow at some point, and I like being invincible, and you probably like that too, and that is a thing that was in other Mario games, so personally, I think it's completely plausible, though I'm probably completely wrong, and at which point I'm really sorry about that. We all make mistakes. But that's the beta of Super Mario 64. God, I hope this video turned out better than the last one. And look, I know it's quite a shame that we didn't see the cool earlier version of this game come to fruition, because as we're humans, we desire things that we cannot have. A flaw of mankind, unfortunately. I could go on and say more sexy, not at all intellectual things, but I think we've had enough of that for today. As this is the last video for the year though, this has been Gaming Mysteries. Thank you so much for following me over the past year and watching these videos. I know a lot of people say this. I'm not going into end sleep, by the way. I'm just going to end the video on this note. I do want to thank everybody for watching my videos and just making me feel like I have a voice when it seemed like throughout most of my life I didn't. And people made that apparent because they beat me up. So thank you a lot. I do mean it. And next year I'm gonna make more videos. I have a lot of stuff planned. I hope you enjoyed this video. And until next time, this has been Gaming Mysteries. Thanks for watching. Happy New Year's, you guys. Oh, and Merry Christmas. I forgot about that. Oh, and by the way, before I go, since I'm not doing Against Late, shout-outs to Did You Know Gaming for the shout-out. That was really nice. I love you, man. Okay, bye, guys.